Welcome to Exploring the Mystical Side of Life with your host, Linda Lang.
Hi, this is Linda Lang from ThoughtChange.com. I'm here exploring the mystical side of life this week with Mike Anthony. Mike is a bartender who, in his spare time, likes to explore evidence of life after death. He was featured on the Netflix special, Surviving Death, so I'm very excited for our conversation. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So, how long have you been interested in life after death?
I'd say it's been a lifelong background interest, ever since I was a tiny little kid. I've wondered about it, I remember being really young and having the fleeting notion that, someday my mom and dad aren't going to be here. And I was really bothered by that, even at a young age. And I, of course, pushed that thought away. So it's always been kind of in the back of my mind. But until my dad died in 2011, so 10 years ago, I was hit smack in the face with the reality of death. And that caused what I would call, I guess, a spiritual crisis or an existential crisis. And that sent me on a completely unexpected path. As you said, I'm standing behind a bar, bartending on Broadway 1 minute, and then the next minute, I'm researching the actual possibility of scientific evidence suggestive of life beyond the death of the physical body.
I think it's interesting how you said actual evidence. So, do you personally need like hardcore evidence that there's something after this?
I didn't until my dad passed. Up until that time, I've always had this vague sense, at the same time that I was worried about losing my parents, I've also had this vague sense that there is much more going on than meets the eye, much more going on than science can probably get at, with no matter how sensitive our instruments are. But when my dad passed, that vague sense was no longer enough for me. And at that time, I desperately needed hard evidence, because I've also always loved science. Before I became an actor and a bartender, I had planned on being a science teacher. I was going to be a high school science teacher. So I went to college for that. And I've studied science my whole life and been interested in it my whole life. And, mainstream science, if you go to a typical science class at any mainstream university here in America, they're going to tell you that there is absolutely no possibility of life after death, right? There's just no chance. When the brain stops getting oxygen, the illusion of self, because that's what they say it is, an illusion, disappears and is gone forever. So when my dad passed, I was now being overwhelmed by those teachers, those professors I'd had in my past, hearing, their thoughts on the matter. And it overwhelmed that calming sense that I'd always had, that don't worry, there's more going on than we can understand.
As we progress through our life, those things that we hear kind of crop up and overtake sometimes our knowingness.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, have you found proof that makes you know that there's life after our body?
I have. It's going to be hard to find anyone, right? Any scientist to say 100% life goes on after death, right? But I have seen things that do tell me, and any scientists who were with me, if they'd witnessed what I'd seen, they do say 100% that consciousness is not confined to the skull. I can at the very least say that. The rest of the evidence, if we take the whole of the various lines of evidence, such as near-death experiences, people who die and then are resuscitated, children who have memories of previous lives, end-of-life experiences, right? When people are transitioning and the things that they see, if you talk to almost any hospice nurse, they'll probably have, chances are, great stories for you. If you take all of this evidence together, to me, it's incredibly suggestive of life after death. But if we're just going to stick with what is provable, I have seen things that are objectively provable, that prove consciousness is not confined to the brain.
It's such an interesting theory, actually, that it would be confined to the brain. But I guess there are those people that kind of believe the dead bug theory. that when you're gone, you're gone. And yet, I don't know, it just feels like for me in my own personal experience, there is so much more than this physical life. And I've had interactions with spirits, I've had messages from deceased loved ones, and some pretty mystical experiences that really tell me that this is just a drop in an ocean of possibilities.
Yeah, as have I. My dad, as soon as he was out of body, he began making sure that I knew. And he knew how my brain worked. You know, he knew that I had the scientific side and he knew the type of evidence I was going to require. And my gosh, did he provide it. I mean, the book is incredibly detailed. I tell the step by step what happened. It wasn't just talking with mediums. I have had what you would call mystical, described as mystical things happen in my life that to me personally proved my dad is still with me. So there's a big difference between that and what we can make happen in a lab, right? Something that's going to satisfy science. It satisfies me and you and people on a personal level every single day. And for us, that's enough, right? For me, I didn't need science anymore. Once I had some of these things happen, I knew he was still with me. For science as a method, as a process, as something that requires replicability, you know, these things just, most of them cannot be captured in a lab. And now I kind of have come to the personal conclusion that maybe it's set up that way on purpose. You know, maybe there needs to be maybe a level of doubt, even a tiny level of doubt, to give us this human experience. You know, if all of us knew 100% that life goes on after death, maybe that changes the human experience and takes away some learning possibilities, some potential for certain lessons, maybe, you know, who knows, but that's now my personal instinct on this. Because I was very shocked to find that when I started investigating this, it's not that science has not looked at it. We've had some of our brightest scientists of all time, Nobel Prize winners, investigate this stuff and have experiences like you and I have had and come out saying science was wrong. Something beyond the physical body exists, and it appears to us that consciousness is not created by the brain. It's something separate than the brain. But you're never going to be taught that at like Harvard. If you go to a biology class in Harvard, they're never going to point out the place in the body where the consciousness sits because they don't believe that it's a separate thing from the body. So
Never say never.
if we look at quantum physics, right, which is where we are now, the sort of cutting edge, for anyone to say that anything is impossible blows my mind. I mean, I literally had a scientist say this to me. It can't be possible because it can't be possible. You know, what science is supposed to be is a method by which we observe something happen, and then we try to figure out what it is, right? But in order to get to the figuring out part, first you have to accept that it's happening. And a lot of mainstream science doesn't even accept, they're just simply not looking at it. So what I found is that the evidence is out there if you go and look for it. We are teeming with various lines of evidence, right? The United States government has spent millions of dollars on a program called the Stargate program. The United States government, after millions of dollars and decades of research, concludes that psychic abilities are real. And not only are they real, they have used them, unfortunately, in a military capacity, sadly. But so even something like the United States government believes that that's the case. So that's why I feel like it's maybe set up that way, that the information is out there for those who seek it, and maybe it's kind of locked away for other people who aren't ready for it yet for whatever reason, or don't need it yet in their lives. That's my personal instinct.
Sometimes I think we were actually a little bit more open-minded in the earlier part of the 1900s when the spiritualists were really exploring consciousness, God, their own spark of the divine. And somehow that seems like it got lost or maybe went underground.
It did. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, some of the scientists that I'm talking about, like for instance, ectoplasm, which is probably something your listeners are familiar with, which I thought that was invented by Ghostbusters and Harold Ramis. That's how I knew the word ectoplasm. I came to find out it's a substance exuded by physical mediums in a deep trance state sometimes, rarely. But it was named, the term was coined by a guy named Charles Richet, who was a Nobel Prize winner in physiology. So he won the Nobel Prize and he was an expert in physiology. And he's the person who actually cut off a piece of this stuff and took it to a lab and checked it out.
That's crazy.
Crazy. Yes. Now we should say that if you're sitting in a physical seance, don't just do that. You got to ask. And it was in conjunction with the spirit world. And I now can say that without sounding crazy, because for a long time, all of this stuff was going on. I'm like, how? I would say the word ectoplasm and kind of whisper it and then look over my shoulder to see who might be listening, you know. But yeah, he was given permission by the spirit world to do this experiment, and they actually let him remove a piece. Now, it doesn't last. That's the thing. It's not something that can last very long away from the medium, because it's a part of the medium's body. The spirit world, according to the spirit world, it's actually the only substance that's it has part of it is a spiritual. It has a spiritual aspect to it as well as a physical, and it's the only substance that sort of combines the two. So it doesn't last very long here in the physical world without the medium there. But it lasted long enough before it dissolved away and literally disappeared to be tested. So yeah, we were much more open-minded to that. And then, you know, the Industrial Revolution happened, and there are a lot of theories as to why this went away. And it's not only now, I mean, in cultures of the past, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, in cultures in times past, death and life after death was a part of life throughout the society. It was something they, you know, we kind of hide death away here in the West, right? It often takes place in a hospital room, kind of hidden from the rest of us. To me, I think that ends up being a negative. You know, there's a great episode in the Surviving Death series with a guy named Dr. Christopher Kerr, who runs the hospice program in Buffalo, I believe it is. And, you know, he talks about how if we were to open up the door and let the light in on death and take away some of the fear, because typically when someone passes away in that way in the hospital, it's not this violent, scary thing. Often there is this beautiful energy that comes into the room, and it often starts to happen before the person passes, right? And they'll often maybe see a deceased loved one, you know, their mom is suddenly waiting for them. I had this happen in my own life. My brother-in-law's grandmother, while we were filming the Netflix series, she had this. She had this visit from her family members. And it was this fascinating thing, because before this, she had been completely out of it mentally, right? She couldn't remember our names. Then one day she wakes up and like this, she's rattling off these people that she hasn't seen in 30, 40 years, like her mom, her dad, her uncle. And as though and she's saying, oh my God, you don't see them? They're standing right there. And then she couldn't wait to be with them. So it ended up being this beautiful process. But through the Industrial Revolution, I think then science became the God, I guess, for lack of a better word. People wanted to put their faith in science instead. And partially I understand that, because if you go back to, you know, pre-Renaissance, the church had this very authoritative hold on people who were trying to figure stuff out. You know, got people like Copernicus and Galileo, right? Galileo looks up at the shadows on Jupiter and he says, you know, I'm pretty sure Copernicus was right, that the earth is going around the sun. And the Vatican, you know, put him on house arrest and threatened to kill him for coming up with that crazy idea. So you can see why science got a bit repressed.
Well, I do think that you're right, that it's time to look at death a little differently and remove some of the fear stigma that's attached to it. I was present with my father's passing, and it was difficult, obviously, but it was amazing and beautiful and peaceful at the same time. My sister and I were both channeling Reiki to him just a few hours before he passed. And when we put our hands over his body, we could, instead of feeling the energy come through us, which we would normally do, we could feel like bubbles of energy coming off of him. And it was like, I think he's leaving, you know, like he's leaving.
Yeah.
It was really amazing. And actually, just recently, I had a medium tell me, my father came in, showed the medium his watch with the time on the watch, which I have. And he said that, like, the medium would never know that.
Right.
And through the medium, we were told that he knew we were there and it really helped him cross over. So it was really a beautiful message to receive.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, me too. And so for anyone who's losing a loved one or in the future, when that happens, send your good intentions, your positive energy. It's received on some level.
I believe that, and I've heard that many, many times now through mediums and through other sources, that what we do here has an effect on the spiritual world, just as the spiritual world affects our lives in ways that we're typically not conscious of, but they're kind of always there, sending messages and pulling some strings. But at the same time, I've been told that our thoughts can also affect things on that side. And, because it's not necessarily the case that we wake up on the other side and suddenly we're like these completely enlightened beings. That's not necessary. We might have a wider perspective. We might still require healing of some kind. And from what I've been told, our thoughts of love and forgiveness and all of that makes its way there instantaneously and has an effect.
I actually believe that as well, because I know that I've had some messages come through where maybe a loved one felt really bad about something that happened while they were in body. And it's very healing for them and for you when you do any kind of forgiveness process with them.
Yeah, forgiveness, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves and for everybody else.
So I'm curious, Mike, have you had any tangible experiences, your lights flickering or the doorbell ringing or some sign from your father?
Many, many, many. Yeah, the lights flickering is one that is incredible, the way that it happens. And it's particularly meaningful because my parents got divorced when my sister and I were very young, and we'd see my dad on the weekends. And when he left us on Sunday nights, he would flick the lights in his car to say bye, and we would flick the lights on the porch. And that was like a last goodbye. So right after he died, there was one morning I came out of my apartment I was living in Queens, in a big apartment building, and every apartment had a light in the hallway above their door. So I had like a row of 10 lights out in that hallway. And I was having a really difficult morning. It was very shortly after he passed. And I was thinking, I don't know if I can do this today. Working on Broadway, you have to have a certain level of engagement and happiness in order to do the job well. And I was not sure that I had it that day. But I open up the door, and the light, only the one above my doorway, and I have video of this, it's blinking crazily in this crazy way. And I pan the video down the hall. You could see it's only this one light. So there have been many, many things like that. But the ultimate one, which I describe in the last chapter of the book, the one that completely altered my perception of what's possible, was sitting with a physical medium named Stuart Alexander, who's an amazing man, and he's now a dear friend. But I saw the ectoplasm that Charles Richet took a piece of and examined. I saw it with my own eyes form into my father's face. And then I saw a human hand form out of nothing, Linda, out of nothing, out of this rolling mist. I describe it in detail in the last chapter of the book, but I hesitated to put it in the book because it's mostly aimed at a mainstream audience who probably hasn't heard of a lot of this stuff the way that your listeners have. And I really thought, oh man, people will get to the end of this book and then they'll think this guy's just nuts. But I had to put it in because it is the absolute truth. And to see that with your own eyes, it completely changes everything else in your life.
You gave me goosebumps as you were telling that story. How fantastic and amazing, because there aren't a lot of mediums that actually can do that. So
yeah,
amazing you found someone.
The dominoes that had to fall to put me in that room, as I describe in the book, it was all my father, definitely all my father. I found a book sitting on a shelf in Barnes & Noble written by Leslie Kean, who's a New York Times journalist. And she's the one who wrote about this guy, Stuart Alexander. And it was only because I trusted this woman's integrity so much that I put so much weight in what she wrote, because she wrote about her first experience seeing ectoplasm. And that was the first time I thought, my gosh, this sounds real. And then less than a year after stumbling upon that book, less than a year, I was sitting in that room talking to my father to his face, which had formed about an inch in front of the medium's face.
Wow.
So incredible, incredible.
Is it dangerous to touch the ectoplasm?
It can be dangerous for the medium. Yeah, it's a sensitive substance, and according to the spirit world, if it hasn't been prepared in the right way for physical contact, it can very quickly be retracted back into because it comes from the medium. It comes typically through maybe their ears, nose, mouth. Through Stuart, it often comes out of his solar plexus area, which is just baffling to see happen. And it can, if it's unexpectedly touched, it can retract. And physical mediums in the past have died from that happening. They've gotten wounds from it. But if the spirit world prepares it in the right way, you can touch it. And so that's what will completely blow your mind. And I was sitting by this little table in between Stuart, the medium, and Leslie, the writer of Surviving Death, as I watched this amorphous blob. It's very difficult to describe the movement of this thing. I mean, the fluid nature of it, it's almost impossible to describe. It's otherworldly just in the way it moves. And then I watched two fingers suddenly form out of it in this fluid way, and then a human hand that grabbed Leslie's hand, and she shook it. And she could feel the bones. She could feel the warmth of the skin, right? And I'm literally this close to it because they allowed me to kneel down by the table where this is happening. So I'm just 5 inches from this handshake. And then she lets go, and I watch the hand in front of my face, 5 inches away, dissolve back into that blob and then disappear, just disappear. Yeah.
So cool. So cool. Amazing.
To have that experience, it moved me because by that point I had already believed that 100% that my dad was still with me. I completely believed it because I'd had so many of those experiences, like the lights flashing, other incredible things with butterflies, and many, many dreams, which were visitations. But seeing that, having that happen, moved me from believing to knowing to knowing. And that's a quantum leap from belief to knowledge. And once you have that experience, it's very powerful because, we very easily, I think, give over our intellectual autonomy, is a way to say it, right? If someone has a lot of letters after their name and they're in a lab coat, we might easily believe what they have to say, and what they have to say can easily become our reality. But now that when you have an experience like this that I've had, it doesn't matter how many Nobel Prizes or letters a person has after their name. If they are telling me that the paranormal is impossible, I know they are wrong. It doesn't matter how much smarter than me they are, which they are. On this particular point, they're wrong.
I appreciate your conviction. I'm like you. I have no doubt. I have no doubt at all. So thank you so much, Mike, for coming today and sharing your story with us.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks.
Would you like to share your contact information, or you should share your book as well?
Sure. The book is Love Dad. I wrote another book called Life at Hamilton about my bartending experiences. This book is called Love Dad, How My Father Died, Then Told Me He Didn't. And the website is mikeanthony.com.
And how blessed are you that your father isn't too busy in the spirit world just playing, that he comes and actually communicates with you and guides you to the wisdom?
I am the luckiest guy around. I mean, my gratitude to my dad is immense. And given the nature of my father on this side, he was not a normal guy in terms of his capacity for love. I mean, he was just an unbelievable man. So it's not at all a surprise that he has gone to the lengths that he has gone to. I picture him over there now sweating after all of the work he's done to get me to where I am. So thank you, Dad. I really honestly know that he's right here right now. So thank you. And thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. And thank you for listening to this week's episode of Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. You will find all of our conversations on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeart, and your favorite podcast platform. Come and visit me at thoughtchange.com. Pick up your copy of Learning to Listen. And while you're there, check out my program, Alchemy from the Inside Out. Maybe it's time to bring a little bit of energy medicine and spiritual awakening into your life. That's it for this week. Bye for now.